Pakistan has quietly paused a $1.5 billion arms deal with Sudan after Saudi Arabia withdrew financial backing, a move that reveals how external pressure can abruptly reshape military supply chains in active conflict zones. At stake is not just one transaction, but a broader question about who ultimately controls the flow of weapons into one of the world's most destabilized regions, and how alliances can override commercial and strategic ambitions without public confrontation. The suspended deal involved Pakistan supplying weapon systems and fighter aircraft to Sudan at a time when its defense exports were gaining visibility following military tensions with India in 2025. The arrangement had reportedly reached advanced stages earlier this year, with Saudi Arabia initially acting as a key intermediary. However, once Riyadh stepped back from financing, Pakistani decision-makers reassessed the viability of proceeding, particularly given the financial dependency embedded in the agreement. To understand why this matters, it is necessary to look at Sudan's internal conflict, which began escalating in 2023 between the National Army and the paramilitary Rapid Support Forces. Over roughly 3 years, this confrontation has evolved into what international observers describe as the world's largest humanitarian crisis, with millions displaced and state institutions fragmenting. Sudan's geographic position along the Red Sea, combined with its gold reserves, has made it a focal point for competing regional and global interests. At the center of the conflict are Sudan's army leadership and the RSF, each backed by different external actors. Saudi Arabia has aligned itself more closely with the Sudanese army, while the United Arab Emirates has faced accusations of supporting the RSF through logistical channels, although it has consistently denied such involvement. This divergence reflects a broader pattern in Middle Eastern geopolitics, where allied states pursue parallel but not identical strategies in fragile regions. Pakistan's role in this equation is shaped by both economic necessity and strategic positioning. The country has been actively seeking to expand its defense exports, particularly after demonstrating the operational effectiveness of its systems in regional skirmishes. However, its financial reliance on Saudi Arabia creates structural constraints. Riyadh has provided critical loans and economic support to Islamabad, especially during periods of fiscal stress, which means Saudi preferences carry significant weight in Pakistan's external engagements. The turning point appears to have come after a high-level meeting in Riyadh in March, where Sudanese army representatives and Saudi officials discussed the trajectory of the conflict. Following that meeting, Saudi Arabia reconsidered its approach and withdrew from financing the arms deal. This decision effectively removed the financial foundation of the agreement, making it difficult for Pakistan to proceed independently without assuming additional risk. The implications extend beyond this single transaction. Reports indicate that another proposed deal, valued at approximately $4 billion and involving the Libyan National Army, is also under review as Saudi Arabia reassesses its broader regional strategy. This suggests a shift away from indirect involvement in conflicts through financial channels, possibly influenced by external advice from Western countries cautioning against entanglement in proxy wars across Africa. What fundamentally changes if this pause becomes permanent is the balance of military supply in Sudan. If Pakistan withdraws completely, the Sudanese army may need to seek alternative suppliers, potentially altering the dynamics on the ground. Reduced access to advanced systems could slow operational capacity, while new suppliers might introduce different conditions or alignments, further complicating the conflict landscape. One possible scenario is that Saudi Arabia continues to distance itself from direct or indirect military financing in Sudan and Libya. In that case, Pakistan's defense export strategy would need recalibration, focusing on markets where financial backing is more secure or where transactions can proceed without third-party guarantees. This could limit Islamabad's ability to scale its defense industry in the short term, even as demand for such systems remains high globally. Another scenario involves a reversal, where Saudi Arabia re-engages under revised conditions, possibly tied to diplomatic progress in Sudan. If that happens, the deal could be revived, but with stricter oversight and clearer alignment with Saudi strategic objectives. In this case, Pakistan would retain its role as a supplier, but with less autonomy in determining the terms and scope of its defense relationships. The broader geopolitical consequences are tied to how regional powers manage influence without direct military intervention. Sudan has become a testing ground for this approach, where financial leverage, logistical support, and diplomatic positioning replace overt deployment. The pause in Pakistan's deal illustrates how quickly these mechanisms can shift, especially when major financial backers reconsider their exposure. At a systemic level, this development also reflects the interconnected nature of modern conflicts. Decisions made in Riyadh can halt transactions negotiated in Islamabad and intended for deployment in Khartoum. This chain of influence underscores how sovereignty in defense procurement is increasingly mediated by external financing and alliances, rather than purely national decision-making. For the global order, the situation highlights a gradual recalibration of risk tolerance among key regional actors. Saudi Arabia's reconsideration of its role suggests a preference for limiting direct association with prolonged conflicts, particularly those with high humanitarian costs and uncertain outcomes. This does not eliminate competition for influence, but it changes the methods through which that competition is exercised. As this story continues to develop, the key factors to watch include whether Saudi Arabia formalizes a broader policy shift away from financing military engagements in Africa, how Pakistan adjusts its defense export strategy in response, and whether Sudan's internal conflict attracts new external actors to fill the emerging gaps. Each of these elements will shape not only the trajectory of the Sudan crisis, but also the evolving architecture of regional power projection. In the end, the pause deal is less about a single agreement and more about the limits of strategic alignment in a fragmented geopolitical environment. It shows how financial dependency, alliance structures, and conflict dynamics intersect in ways that can abruptly redirect policy. What follows next will depend on whether states prioritize stability through restraint or continue to compete through indirect means. And that balance will define the next phase of influence in regions already under strain.